Welcome back to the Tara Palmeri Show. For years, the Epstein story was treated primarily as a sex trafficking scandal. But underneath it all, I think we all know there are questions about who he was really working for. After all, why did he need a network to be that expansive and to include that many powerful people and so many victims? There have been questions about why there are hidden cameras all over his home, some so small that you could fit them in a Kleenex box. After all, the FBI is sitting on 40 terabytes of video footage that we've never seen. And now, royal biographer Andrew Lownie, in his book entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York, has some new reporting based on the Epstein files, intelligence sources, and an FBI document that describes how Epstein was working as a foreign actor, targeting Prince Andrew through women, money, and contacts. He alleges that in some cases, Prince Andrew was a willing and knowing participant, driven by his hatred for his brother, King Charles, and believing that the throne really belonged to him. What follows is one of the wildest conversations I've had about the Epstein network, and that is saying something, complete with Russian operatives, Israeli intelligence, powerful businessmen, and women and girls used as leverage. And of course, we get into that suspicious suicide note that Epstein allegedly wrote and has just recently been produced by the Department of Justice, and why Lownie, who has been reporting for many years for this book, just doesn't think it's real. I want to go into this document about the Russian intelligence services. And, it talked about, figures like Jeffrey Epstein as access to political and business leaders. Can you tell me more about this document about the Russian intelligence services and how Epstein and Prince Andrew were connected?
Yeah, it's a document I was given by an American intelligence official. It's dated 15th of January this year. It's called Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, Political Corruption. It's categorized as both RIS, the Russian intelligence services, and Chinese intelligence services. And it kind of goes into the fact that Russian criminal gangs have been basically infiltrated by Russian intelligence. They're operating together. They're taking advantage of, for example, green energy subsidies. And they're out to basically, this is part of the hybrid warfare that's going on. And they're using sort of useful idiots like Andrew to lend credibility to projects, to give access to particularly important people. They say that he's driven not because he's been blackmailed, but because he's been given the things that he likes, which is woman contacts, money. A lot of it is driven by hatred for his brother, Charles. So really, really revealing sort of document. And certainly, there are a lot of Chinese and Russian spies hanging around Andrew. And you can see why. Very easy to get access. There's no proper scrutiny of him. And if you want to meet important people, then a British royal is a good way of doing it, and particularly one who's looking for money. And we see various figures. There's an interesting figure called Johnny Hon, who's very close to both North Korean and Chinese governments, who's been paying large sums of money to Sarah Ferguson each year as a brand ambassador for one of his businesses. He gave quite a lot of money to one of her businesses, raised money from Chinese investors and used her as a way of raising the money, and then gave money to her and spent quite a lot of money himself on things like meetings with Victoria's Secret's models. And the sort of things that, most people would run a mile from, and if there was proper scrutiny of the royals, would not be allowed to happen. So I think there is, as I say, is an intelligence aspect to this. There's quite a well-known political commentator here who's also written about this, clearly tipped off by his own government sources, that this is the way the story is going. And it's clear that Andrew was blackmailed, or certainly there's compromat on him from honeytraps, or from all over the world. I mean, Libya, China, Middle East, Central Asia, they've all got compromising material about Andrew in these honeytraps. Andrew would request girls be provided for him when he made these trips. There's one episode in Prague where someone paid 10,000 euros, I think, for a former Miss Slovakia to sleep with him, keep him happy. There's a story in Hong Kong of someone being deputed to take care of him and being shocked by Andrew bringing in prostitutes, watching porn, discussing Japanese rope bondage. I mean, these are on official trips. I mean, in the hardback, I had a story of him in Thailand booking in 40 prostitutes on an official trip. And certainly one of my contacts was talking about how, when the expenses came in from one of these trips, Andrew was claiming the massages with some of these escorts on taxpayers, the taxpayers tab, and he was told, yes, let it through, we'll disguise this under general accounting. Extraordinary. He just felt he could do anything he wanted and no one would challenge him.
It's incredible. So you report that U.S. intelligence was concerned that Jeffrey Epstein was running the world's largest honey trap for Israel and Russia, which brings me back to Robert Maxwell, someone that I covered very closely for the series, that the Sony podcast series that I did in 2021 called Power, the Maxwells. And it's widely believed that Maxwell was a double agent working for the two countries, helping Soviet Jews move to Israel. How are those two people connected, Maxwell and Epstein? And when did they become connected? And can you explain how Prince Andrew fits into all of this?
Well, I mean, it's still a mystery, and I suspect you know more about it than I do. I mean, one of my news sources talks about kind of hanging out with Ghislaine, Epstein, and Andrew in the mid-1980s, which would suggest that relationship goes back a decade. I mean, the story, the different versions, that Ghislaine met Andrew when she was at Oxford in the mid-80s. There are other stories saying that Sarah Ferguson introduced Andrew when Sarah Ferguson and Ghislaine were kind of sort of social butterflies in New York in the 90s. I think it does make sense. We all, in some ways, this link with Maxwell, presumably it could have been introduced through an intelligence source. We know that there were, when Epstein was teaching at Dalton School, he had connections clearly with the Barr family, who had backgrounds in intelligence there, but with American intelligence. But perhaps through some other contacts, he was brought together with Maxwell, who, as you say, was working for the British, for the Russians, and for Israeli intelligence. Right. And that's how the money, that's how he made some money so quickly. He was kind of brought in. I mean, there's stories from one intelligence person I talked to about Ghislaine, I think, being introduced to Epstein way back in the 80s at an art gallery in New York. So, I mean, there are just so many rumors running around, very difficult to pin down. And there are one or two commentators, Ari Ben-Shi, is it, who's talked about working for Maxwell and stories about Epstein. So, but it sounds like Epstein was actually not the mastermind of all this, but it was just another player in a kind of wider conspiracy, which goes back a lot earlier than people think. It involves intelligence services, and it was the compromat that was all about political subversion as well as financial manipulation, and it was just the device to compromise people, to get them to do whatever the various organizations wanted them to do.
Yeah, for some context about Robert Maxwell, he was a media baron at the time who was a rival to Rupert Murdoch. I mean, he owned the New York Daily News, the Mirror, MTV Europe, Peregrine Press, a number of media properties. And he also was a member of parliament at one time. He was, a high-flying media mogul, and his daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, if he survived, and not survived, we don't. That's another thing. He died mysteriously off the side of his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, when he was suddenly in a position where he had robbed the pensioners from the Mirror, and he was obviously probably more easily compromised because he was in that financial position. And so he mysteriously dies. His body washed ashore. They bury him in the Mount of Olives in Israel, which is reserved for princes and kings and people of the high state. And, Ghislaine said in her testimony to Todd Blanche, if you can believe him or not, that Hank Greenberg called and asked Robert Maxwell what he thought of of Jeffrey Epstein when he was thinking of hiring him. I believe it was Hank that did that. And so, there are a lot of questions about how far back their relationship goes. Did, Robert bring Epstein in earlier on than we think? Did he introduce Ghislaine to Jeffrey? And it's really hard to get down to the bottom of it, but they certainly seem like very similar characters, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and Ghislaine, because no one's ever really been able to explain Ghislaine meeting Epstein. And if it came, it's all supposed to have happened after her father's death when she came to New York. But it sounds like it all happened beforehand. So, I think that's what's so fascinating. This story has a long way still to run. I think we've only really got the tip of the iceberg in terms of what really happened.
Right. Did her father launder his money through Jeffrey Epstein? And is that how she had this multi-million-dollar townhouse after he died?
Yes. Well, I think, that's certainly one of the suspicions. And of course, all that again comes back to connections with Trump and some of the work that people like Craig Unger has done. So it's I think as we begin to try and put the pieces together, we're beginning to get a sense of what happened.
Right. I mean, I find it fascinating too that Trump and Robert Maxwell were on his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, in New York, and Ghislaine is trying to sell Trump their corporate gifts. This company. I mean, there's so many crossover. There's so much crossover between these two worlds, and Well, I want to bring us to today, the present day. We know that Prince Andrew put out a statement saying he thinks it's best for the family if he steps aside from royal life. Does not mention the victims. Can you tell me a little bit about the reaction to that in the family, how Charles has handled it, what this could do to his throne and his reign?
Well, I think there was a great deal of outrage after Andrew was allowed to make that statement at the beginning of October. I mean, as you say, he didn't express any remorse or apology, though he'd been, told that he should. He was allowed to say that he was stepping down voluntarily. He denied all the allegations, and I think that forced the king to really do something. And the king should always have made the statement he made at the end of October. He should have made at the beginning of October, and. He earned a lot of respect when he was much more ruthless, because I think he's just kind of dithered on this. The royals have been too slow to address this and get ahead of the story. So we saw some things change. I think the publication of Virginia Giuffre's book also changed public opinion. Again, what's interesting, I was told by my FBI source that they provided a copy of Virginia Giuffre's book while she was alive, so pre-April, to the royal family, so they knew what was coming. And yet nothing was done. And it's always this. It's only ever in reaction to events. There is this big question. I mean, the king got heckled in October. That was another factor in terms of him, taking the title away from Andrew, getting eventually out of Royal Lodge. But the question that's still being asked, what did the royal family know and when did they know it? And what did they do about it? And if they have been protecting Andrew, they've been aware of what he's been up to for a long time, that's going to be very damaging. And I think, this is the thing the king needs to answer. I mean, this is a story that's been in the press for 15 years. There have been particularly highlights. One in 2010 when Sarah was caught selling access to Andrew for £500,000. The 2022 Selman Turk High Court case in which £1.3 million was being fenced through Ferguson and Andrew's accounts, which couldn't be explained. I mean, even when my book came out in August, though there was some controversy, nothing happened. They didn't actually address some of the things that I'd raised. And so it's really only with the releases at the end of last year and through this year that really anything has been done. But even then, I think it's performative. It's saying, let the law take its course. But at the same time, I'm hearing stories of policemen being reminded of their obligations of confidentiality, etc. So it's all window dressing. What goes on in public and what is happening behind the scenes, I think, are two very different things.
Yep. And we also went to Sarah Ferguson for comment. She's not responded. And we understand that you've made attempts to contact the palace on the allegations against Andrew. I'm still in shock that in 2009, Sarah tried to go into business with Jeffrey Epstein. Sarah Ferguson was talking about giving him a 51% stake in Mother's Army, a company and personal brand that aimed to help amplify the voices of mothers all over the world. I mean, it's shocking to me.
Well, time and time again, she uses charities, for basically financial reasons. And I mean, again, the relationship with Howard Lutnick, who gave her free accommodation and offices in the two towers, but also was involved in these money-making operations. Andrew was going to lend credibility to a lot of these operations, which would actually bring Cantor Fitzgerald quite a lot of money.
Howard Lutnick is our Commerce Secretary, by the way, who denied that he had continued a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after 2009, but it appears that his relationship continues to at least 2012. I want to talk about the cover-up, the death. Now we have this letter where Jeffrey Epstein is supposedly saying, goodbye, this is it for me. It's his suicide note. Do you think it's real?
Yes, I don't believe the letter is genuine. I mean, we don't know the provenance. It's odd why it suddenly appeared. It's not the way that Epstein written. But, I think there are also questions now about the suicide. I mean, putting aside the suicide note, I mean, there's evidence from Michael Baden, the sort of forensic pathologist, that this was a homicide rather than a suicide. We've got inmates saying that he couldn't possibly have committed suicide given the height of the beds and the sheets. We've got mysterious payments to the two last guards who saw him, who mysteriously fell asleep both at the same time when someone came into his cell, we think, or when he committed suicide. We've got lots of shredding of documents. We've got cameras that fail. We've got people with testimony saying that he wasn't suicidal. I think, there was this concern that he was about to spill the beans, and therefore, he could prove to be rather dangerous. And I think, the fact that he wrote his will a few days before he died doesn't suggest he was committing suicide, but that he might himself be suicided. And there's a whole series of people who've died in mysterious circumstances through suicide in prison.
Right. I mean, prisons supposedly are designed so that this won't happen, right?
Yes, I mean, you're supposed to be safe in prison, and again, interesting things. Cellmates moved out of the cell. No one was disciplined. This was pretty embarrassing to have a high-level prisoner like that who was able to commit suicide. Lots and lots of things just don't add up. Tova Noel, who's one of the guards, I think has just given some testimony. But again, her testimony doesn't really make sense. She talks about these quite large payments, which are, I think, enough to buy a car, were for overtime. So, I think there's a lot more still to come out about Epstein's death.
Right. You write that according to an FBI report on July 24th, this is just shortly before he kills himself, in the Epstein files, he met a prison psychologist insisting he had, quote, no interest in killing himself and that it would be crazy, his words, to commit suicide. I have a life and I want to go back to living my life. And even Alan Dershowitz himself thought that he would be able to get off. Alan Dershowitz was his lawyer.
Yes, absolutely. It doesn't ring true. I mean, he's not. I mean, talking to victims' lawyers, I mean, everyone said that, he thought he was going to get out of this. He'd managed to get out of everything before. He had expensive lawyers. It was the whole start of the process. And it just doesn't make sense. So, whether we'll ever get to the full story and who, if he was killed, who killed him, is really interesting. I mean, there's talk that it was Mossad agents. There's suggestions, a whole series of quite important people in American politics who may have been behind it, or some of the people, the co-conspirators. Who knows? But maybe something will emerge. Some documentation or some testimony that will shed some light on this.
I remember from the 60 Minutes documentary that was done shortly afterwards, because there were so many inconsistencies in this, former police detective Herman Weisberg, you write about this, told CBS after studying the pictures, quote, it appeared that the scene was, for lack of a better term, staged a bit. And we know that Epstein's brother, Mark, has been trying to prove that he was killed. He hired an independent pathologist, but the body was moved, which makes it difficult. Why do you think Mark is so intent on proving this, that his brother was killed? Is it for insurance money? Does he want to sue the jail? I mean, or is it something else? I'm always suspicious when it comes to him.
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, I actually had lunch with him in New York in December, and he was saying at that stage that he was going to produce a team of experts that were going to prove that it was murder, but he hasn't done so. I mean, I think he was talking about February being the date. Well, here we are in May, and nothing has appeared. But who knows? Again, the full story of Mark Epstein and Jeffrey. I mean, he says that they were remained quite close, but hardly saw each other. But there were several people who were quite close to Jeffrey who have, the accountants and lawyers and people who I don't think we've really got the full story from yet. And I find it extraordinary that people who are working for Epstein haven't been subpoenaed to talk. I mean, the Sarah Kellens and Leslie Groffs and others. It seems extraordinary that they are allowed just to sort of operate quietly and live their lives without any questioning whatsoever.
I also am really bothered that it's all happening behind closed doors. It's something that you mentioned in the book that I don't think has gotten enough attention is that Bill Barr, who was Trump's attorney general at the time, visited Epstein in prison. I mean, what do we think they talked about? And it's interesting to me too, because as we know, Epstein worked for Bill Barr's father at Dalton.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bill Barr has a background in intelligence, as did the father, I think. So it is extraordinary that's never been explained. It seems a very sort of obvious thing, a very public thing to do. And as you say, no one's ever been explained what they talked about, why he came there. Just one of the various mysteries that still surround that death.
I want to go back to the fallout for the royal family. We know that the princesses and Andrew's daughters, they have profited from their role in the royal family. What is to come of them? I mean, they haven't done anything wrong themselves, but it can't be great.
Well, I mean, there's a big PR campaign to sort of paint them as innocent victims of their parents. I think that's not entirely the case. I mean, we have plenty of instances of money being found in their accounts that they couldn't explain from people they didn't know. And I mean, large sums that you would have noticed. There's plenty of evidence of them supporting, promoting banks, for example, in the Middle East and various organizations and charities, which presumably they were paid to do. And that's why I think it's so important to have a proper royal register where people like that do have to declare their business interest in the way that members of parliament in this country have to, so that there is transparency about what they're doing. They're entitled to business careers, but I think if there's a sense that that they're making money off the back of their royal titles, and that these events are done not by Beatrice Mosey but by Her Royal Highness Princess Beatrice, then I think that does raise questions.
Sounds familiar, huh?
So I think we will find more will come out about the daughters in the coming months, and the fact that they were asked for an audit of their business. Sorry?
I said it sounds familiar.
I think
to me.
they were asked for an audit of their business expenses, and those were not. Yeah, well, exactly. I think there's so much that could still come out about them, and I think that's very unwise of the royal family to hold them too tight for the moment, because I think there could be embarrassing disclosures which could have ramifications for the reputation of the family as a whole.
What's Andrew's current state of mind? What is he doing right now?
Well, I mean, his from people I've talked to, he doesn't seem to be as upset as you would expect. He kind of has his quiet daily life. He's always been a bit of a couch potato. He watches TV, and he no longer is able to go out riding, but he goes for walks. He's talking to lawyers. He's not really having people visit him. The relationship with his family seems to be more difficult. I mean, his own daughter didn't tell him directly that she was pregnant. But I think it's a waiting game. He must be wondering if charges will be brought. He doesn't think they will, but he must be wondering what is likely to happen. And you saw those pictures of him after being to the police station in February. And here was a man who I think perhaps certainly on that day, was really coming to realizing how serious a position he was in.
Yeah. Again, what does this mean for Charles and his reign?
Well, I think the feeling is, that the Queen has passed the buck to Charles, and William doesn't want Charles to pass the buck to him. He wants this dealt with in the current reign. If necessary, Charles takes the fight, and that William inherits a throne which is a clean slate, and all the stables have been cleaned. And I think that's not going to happen. And I think that, William sees the reputational damage. He doesn't want to be tarred with this brush. And he would like his father to deal with it. But and I suspect there are conversations going on like that the whole time. But Charles may feel obligated to his mother. He may have done some deal with Andrew to protect the daughters as the price of getting Andrew out of Royal Lodge. Who knows? We're getting very mixed messages about what's happening.
All the while, Andrew is playing World of Warcraft video games.
Yes, well, I mean, he's always enjoyed video games. I mean, he likes, violent films. He would take on date nights. He would take girls to sort of Rambo and Top Gun. So he's not a very sophisticated person. He's not a great reader. He doesn't have a huge hinterland. And so I think it must be difficult. I understand that he often is still in his dressing gown at lunchtime. He's become a bit of a slob. He's kind of lost a sort of purpose and discipline in his life, which he had.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. This was fascinating. Go out, buy the book. You can finally get the paperback in the United States and in Canada. I found it to be fascinating. I had to read it, via PDF, but get the hard copy. This is history and it's happening every day. And I have a feeling you're going to either write another edition or you're going to have more chapters to add.
I'm going to do a new book called Untitled, which will tell the full story of the fall from grace.
Exactly. Actually, Hamilton asked, he said, I'm proud to have been one of the first to listen to the audiobook in the States and support the book. Will the new chapter be automatically added to the audiobook on Audible?
Yes, it will. Absolutely.
Okay.
It will just be added automatically. And I've read it again, and we've made a few small corrections. I think I got the data. I got the gap between Andrew and Princess Diana wrong, for example. So we've made a few tweaks and then added these 40 pages, which will be there on any audio you've already bought.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Andrew. And everyone, you can support this show. You can support my independent journalism, and you can support Andrew by going out and buy the book. Hit this subscribe button. If you're watching this, tell your friends all about it. This is the kind of important investigative journalism into corruption at every single level. And, we're doing this independently, and hope that you will support us in this fearless journalism. Thanks, Andrew.
Great. Very nice to talk to you.
Of course. Thank you. That was another episode of the Tara Palmeri Show. Please hit that subscribe button. Like, comment, share, tell all your friends about it. Let's make this a big story that cannot go away. To support my independent journalism, I am not backed by shadowy funders, super PACs, political groups, foreign actors. I am a truly independent operation. And to keep that going, I need your support. So please go to tarapalmeri.com, sign up for my newsletter, The Red Letter. It's how you can get exclusive reporting straight to your inbox and support independent journalism like this that is fearless and unafraid to go in these directions. I want to thank my producer, Dan Schiffmacher. I want to thank Abby Baker, who does my booking and producing. I want to thank Dan Rosen, my manager, and Adam Stewart on the graphics. Thank you again, and see you soon.